In 1942, Detroit's factories roared, untouched by war's ravages, churning out steel behemoths. The United States, distant from Europe's scarred battlefields, unleashed an industrial torrent, 96,318 aircraft. By 1944, a number more than twice Germany's 40,593, under relentless Allied bombs. The War Production Board, orchestrating this colossus, turned car plants into tank arsenals. Ford's Willow Run facility, a sprawling mile-long complex, spat out one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes, each capable of carrying 4 tons of bombs over 2,000 miles. Across the Atlantic, German factories, battered by raids, struggled to match this pace, their output throttled by shortages and chaos. The number that matters is aircraft. U.S. production more than doubled Germany's, fueling non-stop Allied assaults. This industrial chasm, born of geography and organization, set the stage for a war of attrition Germany could not endure. Workers, from Michigan to California, toiled in shifts, their hands forging the tools that would choke Axis ambition. Meanwhile, Germany's Reichsministerium für Rüstung, under Albert Speer, scrambled to plug gaps, but bomb damage to railways and refineries slowed every gear. The constraint was fuel and transport, America's abundance versus Germany's bottlenecks. This disparity, cold and mechanical, drove the Allies' relentless hammer blows. In 1943, America's factories thrummed with purpose, their steel hearts beating free of war's shadow. The United States, its shores unscarred, harnessed a workforce of millions, their hands forging the sinew of victory. Approximately 6 million women entered defense industry jobs, from welders in Seattle to riveters in Detroit, their labor transforming peacetime plants into war machines. At Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal, workers assembled Sherman tanks, each 33 tons of steel, capable of crossing 100 miles on a tank of fuel. By war's end, 49,234, Shermans would stand against Germany's 492 Tiger IIs, a stark measure of output. The number that matters is tanks. America's relentless production buried Germany's faltering efforts. Reports from the lines described these tanks holding firm in Normandy's churned earth, each a testament to factory craft. Factories hummed 24 hours, fueled by abundant steel and coal, their assembly lines a ballet of precision. The War Production Board, a cold orchestrator, ensured no bolt went unturned, no shift unmanned. This human tide, unified and untouched by bombs, sustained an industrial torrent that Germany could not match. Across the Atlantic, Germany's factories staggered under Allied raids, their workforce a fractured mosaic. 7 million forced laborers, Poles, Ukrainians, French toiled under duress, their output marred by sabotage and despair. In 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force intensified its campaign, targeting synthetic oil plants and rail hubs. By late 1944, Allied bombing had wiped out well over half of Germany's fuel output, especially synthetic plants, grounding aircraft, and stalling tanks. Late-war German engines often had sharply reduced service lives due to poor alloys and lubrication. This fuel choke crippled Luftwaffe sorties, leaving runways empty for want of aviation fuel. German workers, once skilled craftsmen, now labored under flickering lights, their factories battered by nightly raids. Accounts from Essen described lathes seizing for lack of lubricant, pride eroded by hunger. Coal, though plentiful, piled uselessly as bombed railways halted its flow. The constraint was logistics, America's seamless supply chains versus Germany's shattered arteries. While U.S. plants churned out 96,318 aircraft by 1944, Germany managed 40,593, a gap widening with each raid. This disparity, mechanical yet human, tilted the war's balance. The American worker, fed by untouched farms, brought vigor to the line, their morale a quiet engine. In 1943, General Motors plants produced thousands of 2.5-ton trucks that fed supply lines like the Red Ball Express. These GMC CCKW trucks hauled 2.5 tons over rough terrain to sustain Allied fronts. Women, featured in posters as riveters, welded B-24 Liberators at Ford's Willow Run, each bomber carrying 4 tons of bombs over 2,000 miles. Their hands, steady and sure, drove output to heights Germany could not dream. Training programs, swift and standardized, turned novices into specialists, their efficiency unmatched. The United States labor pool, bolstered by immigration and mobilization, filled gaps as men shipped overseas. By contrast, Germany's workforce, bled by conscription and terror, faltered under coercion. Forced laborers, guarded by SS overseers, worked with deliberate slowness, their resentment a silent sabotage. The number that matters is aircraft. America's 96,318 overwhelmed Germany's 40,593. German factories, once the Reich's pride, became tombs of ambition. In 1944, the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heart, absorbed relentless blows from Allied bombers. Factories in the Ruhr, from Krupp's steelworks to the Panther plants at MAN and Daimler-Benz, saw output plummet as power grids failed. German tanks, about 1,500 per month in 1944 against America's about 1,700, used inferior steel, their tracks snapping under stress. Luftwaffe pilots cursed grounded planes, their fuel tanks dry. The constraint was morale. America's workforce surged with purpose. Germany's crumbled under fear. Reports from Berlin described foremen watching workers scatter as sirens wailed, tools abandoned. Hitler's obsession with complex designs, like the Tiger II, slowed production. Each took 300,000 man-hours, while a Sherman required 48,000. This inefficiency, born of hubris, choked Germany's lines. By late 1944, Allied advances, fueled by U.S. trucks and tanks, pressed both fronts, their logistics unbroken. The Falaise Pocket, August 1944, trapped 50,000 Germans, their retreat crushed by air and armor, all supplied by America's unyielding output. The human divide, as much as steel, shaped the war's arc. American workers, their homes safe, saw purpose in each rivet, their output a steady pulse. Germany's laborers, under bombs and whips, saw only survival, their work a grudging necessity. The United States factories, fed by vast resources, produced about 1,700 armored fighting vehicles monthly in 1944, each Sherman a reliable workhorse. Germany's about 1,500, plagued by breakdowns, could not hold. The number that matters is tanks, 49,234 Shermans against 492 Tiger IIs. This chasm, forged by human hands, drove Allied momentum. As 1944 ended, Germany's fronts buckled, their supplies strangled by Allied raids and America's endless matériel. The constraint was unity, America's cohesive workforce versus Germany's fractured despair. This industrial and human disparity, cold and unyielding, set the stage for the Allies' final push, their victory now a matter of time. In 1944, the Eastern Front groaned under Soviet weight, its lines fraying like worn steel. The Red Army, bolstered by American industrial might, surged forward, their offensives relentless, their logistics fed by distant factories. The United States, its plants untouched, delivered thousands of trucks monthly under Lend-Lease, each GMC CCKW hauling 2.5 tons over rough terrain. These trucks, paired with 49,234 Sherman tanks by war's end, each capable of roughly 100 miles on a tank of fuel, sustained Soviet momentum. Germany's 492 Tiger IIs, complex and fuel-hungry, faltered against this tide. The number that matters is tanks. America's output dwarfed Germany's, arming Soviet spearheads. Soviet T-34 tanks outnumbered Panzer Vs substantially, their production reaching 28,000 in 1944 alone. Rolling through Ukraine's mud, their advance unbroken by German counterstrikes. The United States, 96,318 aircraft by 1944, a figure Germany's 40,593, could not match, ensured air cover for these thrusts. Factories in Detroit and California, their assembly lines unbombed, churned out materiel that crossed oceans to choke Axis ambition. This industrial lifeline, mechanical and vast, turned Soviet offensives into juggernauts. Germany's defenses, once formidable, crumbled under pressure, their supply lines severed by Allied raids. By late 1944, Allied bombing had reduced Germany's synthetic fuel production by over 90% from earlier peaks. a blow from U.S. 8th Air Force bombers targeting refineries. Tanks stalled mid-retreat, their engines starved of aviation fuel. Panzer crews cursed tanks often running dry after short distances. The constraint was oil. Germany's war machine froze without it. Factories in the Ruhr, such as Krupp's steelworks and Panther plants at MAN and Daimler-Benz elsewhere in the Reich, produced about 1,580 armored fighting vehicles monthly in 1944 against America's about 1,700. These panzers suffered frequent drivetrain and suspension failures under stress, their components breaking in retreat. The Luftwaffe, its 40,593 aircraft overwhelmed, flew limited sorties against vastly superior Soviet numbers. Bomb-damaged railways halted coal and steel deliveries, starving production lines. The number that matters is aircraft. America's 96,318 secured sky dominance. This industrial gap, now a chasm, left German commanders rationing shells, their blitzkrieg a fading echo. The Soviet advance, fueled by U.S. materiel, exploited this weakness with mechanical precision. In June 1944, Operation Bagration launched, shattering German Army Group Center. Soviet forces, equipped with American trucks and Lend-Lease aircraft, moved vast supplies over hundreds of miles. Fuel reserves ran out within days. T-34 seconds, simpler and more numerous, outmaneuvered Panzer Vs, whose turrets jammed under stress. The United States factories, their output relentless, ensured no pause in Soviet logistics. A single B-24 Liberator strike on rail hubs could halt a German division's retreat. By August, Soviet troops had reclaimed Minsk, encircling 100,000 Germans. The Luftwaffe, grounded by fuel shortages, watched Soviet Il-2 strafe unopposed. Germany's eastern armies, their cohesion gone, retreated through Belarus, many vehicles abandoned for lack of fuel. The constraint was mobility. Soviet forces, backed by U.S. production, outran German defenses. This offensive, a steel avalanche, marked the Eastern Front's irreversible collapse. German commanders, their maps marked with shrinking lines, faced a grim reality. Factories, battered by Allied bombs, could not replace losses. In 1944, Germany's 1,580 armored fighting vehicles faced America's 1,700. A gap widened by Soviet production. Hitler's insistence on heavy designs, like the Tiger II, each requiring 300,000 man-hours, slowed output to a crawl. Shermans, built in 48,000 man-hours, rolled off lines in Detroit, their reliability a quiet edge. The number that matters is tanks. 49,234 Shermans buried Germany's 492 Tiger IIs. Soviet logistics, fed by U.S. trucks hauling 2.5 tons, kept armies moving, while German units, their fuel tanks dry, burned captured wood. The Falaise pocket in August, though a Western Front blow, echoed here. 50,000 Germans trapped, their escape choked by Allied air and armor. The United States' 96,318 aircraft ensured no respite, their bombs severing German lifelines. This industrial disparity, cold and unyielding, turned German retreats into routs. The Eastern Front's collapse reshaped the war's arc, its momentum now Allied. Soviet forces, their supply chains unbroken, pressed toward Poland, their T-34 seconds grinding through German lines. American factories, their output a steady pulse, delivered the tools for this advance. A single GMC truck, hauling 2.5 tons over rough terrain, could sustain a battalion's push. Germany's factories, their power grids failing, produced tanks with welds that split under fire. The Luftwaffe, its pilots grounded, watched Soviet aircraft dominate. The constraint was production, America's vast capacity versus Germany's ruin. By late 1944, Soviet troops stood at the Vistula, their path cleared by U.S. built materiel. Many German formations struggled to maintain communications as supplies dwindled. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 secured Allied dominance. This industrial chasm, forged by distant factories, ensured Germany's eastern defenses, once iron, now shattered like brittle steel, could not hold. The human cost, though secondary to steel, underpinned this shift. American workers, their homes safe, toiled with purpose, their rivets binding victory. Soviet soldiers, armed with U.S. trucks and tanks, fought with grim resolve, their advance a mechanical tide. German troops, their morale broken, abandoned posts, their vehicles useless without fuel. The United States factories, their assembly lines a distant engine, powered this collapse. A B-24 strike on rail yards could disrupt a German division's retreat. The Eastern Front, once a stalemate, became a graveyard for Axis ambition. The constraint was endurance. Soviet forces, backed by America's output, outlasted Germany's faltering machine. As 1944 closed, the Red Army's path to Berlin lay open, its momentum a product of industrial might, its victory a matter of time. In June 1944, Normandy's skies darkened with Allied steel, a storm forged in America's unscarred factories. Allied air forces committed roughly 13,000 aircraft to Overlord on D-Day, drawn from inventories built earlier by U.S. and British industry, each B-17 carrying 4 tons of bombs over 1,600 miles. This armada, part of 96,318 aircraft produced by 1944, dwarfed Germany's 40,593, a gap the Luftwaffe could not bridge. Sherman tanks, 49,234 by war's end, each capable of roughly 100 miles on a tank of fuel, rumbled ashore, their 33-ton frames outpacing Germany's 492 Tiger IIs. The number that matters is tanks. America's relentless output overwhelmed Germany's faltering lines. GMC CCKW trucks, thousands delivered monthly, hauled 2.5 tons over rough terrain, feeding Allied spearheads. Factories in Detroit, their lines unbroken, churned out materiel that crossed the Atlantic to shatter Axis defenses. This industrial torrent, mechanical and precise, turned Normandy's beaches into a springboard for liberation, its momentum unyielding. Germany's western front, stretched thin, buckled under Allied weight, its logistics gutted by raids. By late 1944, Allied bombing had crippled over 90% of Germany's synthetic fuel production, a result of U.S. 8th Air Force strikes on refineries. Many German units frequently ran dry and improvised, their engines starved of aviation fuel. Factories in the Ruhr, such as Krupp's steelworks and Panther plants at MAN and Daimler-Benz elsewhere in the Reich, produced about 1,580 armored fighting vehicles monthly against America's about 1,700. These panzers, plagued by drivetrain and suspension failures, faltered under Allied fire, their welds splitting in retreat. The Luftwaffe, its 40,593 aircraft outmatched, saw its presence over Normandy on D-Day limited and unable to match Allied air power. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 secured sky dominance. Bomb-damaged railways stalled coal and steel, choking production. This industrial chasm, cold and unrelenting, left German commanders scrambling, their defenses a crumbling facade. Allied forces, their logistics seamless, pressed inland, their advance a steel tide. By July 1944, Operation Cobra broke German lines, exploiting U.S.-built materiel. Sherman tanks, their reliability, a quiet edge, moved 100 miles through hedgerows, supported by trucks hauling 2.5 tons. A well-placed B-24 strike on rail hubs could disrupt or halt a division's movement by severing its supply and transport links. German commanders watched convoys roll unopposed, their own tanks grounded by fuel shortages. Panzer crews cursed, stalled engines, as Allied P-51 seconds strafed above. The constraint was fuel. Germany's war machine sputtered without it. By summer 1944, Allied air attacks had severely degraded Germany's rail system, leaving large stretches damaged and operations disrupted. The United States factories, their output relentless, ensured no pause in this offensive. The Falaise Pocket, August 1944, trapped 50,000 Germans, their retreat crushed by air and armor, all sustained by America's industrial might. This tactical shift, a mechanical hammer, marked the Western Front's collapse. The German retreat, once disciplined, dissolved into chaos, their materiel depleted. Factories, battered by bombs, could not replace losses. Germany's about 1,580 armored fighting vehicles monthly faced America's about 1,700, a gap widened by Allied production. Hitler's fixation on heavy designs, like the Tiger II, each requiring 300,000 man-hours, slowed output to a trickle. Sherman's, built in 48,000 man-hours, rolled off Detroit lines, their simplicity, a lethal virtue. The number that matters is tanks. 49,234 Shermans buried Germany's 492 Tiger IIs. Allied logistics, fed by U.S. trucks, kept armies moving, while German units, their fuel tanks dry, resorted to makeshift fuels. The United States, 96,318 aircraft, a relentless swarm, bombed bridges and depots, severing German lifelines. By September, Allied forces crossed the Seine, their path cleared by U.S.-built materiel. Many German formations struggled to maintain communications as supplies dwindled. This industrial disparity, a cold equation, turned German defenses into rubble. Allied momentum, now unstoppable, reshaped the Western Front's fate, its steel heart American. Factories, their assembly lines, a distant engine, produced about 1,700 armored fighting vehicles monthly, each Sherman a workhorse. Germany's factories, their power grids failing, built tanks with brittle welds that split under fire. Fuel reserves were rapidly exhausted in many sectors. The Luftwaffe, its pilots grounded, watched Allied aircraft dominate, their limited D-Day presence overwhelmed. The constraint was production, America's vast capacity versus Germany's ruin. By late 1944, Allied troops pushed toward the Rhine, their logistics fed by U.S. trucks hauling 2.5 tons. Germany's defenses, once a steel wall, shattered like flawed alloy. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 secured Allied dominance. This industrial chasm, forged by distant plants, ensured Germany's western lines, now porous, could not hold. The Falaise pocket's echo lingered. 50,000 Germans surrendered, their retreat a graveyard of ambition. The human toll, though secondary to steel, drove this shift. American workers, their homes safe, toiled with purpose, their rivets binding victory. Allied soldiers, armed with U.S. tanks and trucks, fought with mechanical resolve, their advance a relentless tide. German troops, their morale broken, abandoned posts, their vehicles useless without fuel. The United States factories, their output a steady pulse, powered this collapse. A B-24 strike on rail yards could disrupt a German division's movement, its bombs a precise scalpel. The Western Front, once a fortress, became a rout for Axis hopes. The constraint was endurance. Allied forces, backed by America's output, outlasted Germany's faltering machine. As 1944 closed, the Rhine loomed, its banks a final barrier, the Allies' path cleared by industrial might. Their victory, a matter of time. In early 1945, Allied forces surged across Europe, their steel tide powered by America's unyielding factories. The United States, its industrial might untouched, produced 96,318 aircraft by 1944, a figure Germany's 40,593 could not match. These aircraft, from P-51 Mustangs flying 2,000 miles to B-17 seconds carrying 4 tons of bombs, dominated skies, ensuring relentless pressure. Sherman tanks, 49,234, by war's end, each capable of roughly 100 miles on a tank of fuel, rolled through Germany's heartland, outpacing 492 Tiger IIs. The number that matters is tanks. America's output buried Germany's faltering lines. Thousands of GMC CCKW trucks, hauling 2.5 tons over rough terrain, fed Allied logistics, their convoys unbroken. Factories in Detroit and California, their lines a steady pulse, churned out materiel that crossed oceans to crush Axis resistance. This industrial torrent, mechanical and precise, drove the Allies' final push, its momentum a cold inevitability. Germany's defenses, now porous, collapsed under Allied weight, their logistics severed by relentless raids. By early 1945, Allied bombing had crippled over 90% of Germany's synthetic fuel production, leaving tanks and aircraft grounded. Many German units frequently ran dry and improvised, their engines starved of aviation fuel. Factories in the Ruhr, such as Krupp's steelworks, and Panther plants at MAN and Daimler-Benz elsewhere in the Reich, produced about 1,580 armored fighting vehicles monthly in 1944 against America's about 1,700. These panzers, plagued by drivetrain and suspension failures, broke under Allied fire, their components failing in retreat. The Luftwaffe, its 40,593 aircraft outmatched, flew limited sorties against vastly superior Allied numbers. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 secured sky dominance. Bomb-damaged railways, halted coal and steel, starving production. This industrial chasm, a cold equation, left Germany's fronts defenseless, their lines a shattered lattice. Allied offensives, their logistics seamless, carved through Germany, their advance a mechanical juggernaut. In March 1945, the Rhine crossing at Remagen exploited U.S. built materiel, with Sherman tanks moving 100 miles through mud. A well-placed B-24 strike on rail hubs could disrupt or halt a division's movement, severing its supply lines. German commanders watched Allied convoys roll unopposed, their own tanks stalled by fuel shortages. Panzer crews cursed stalled engines as P-51 seconds roared overhead. The constraint was fuel. Germany's war machine sputtered without it. By spring 1945, Allied air attacks had severely degraded Germany's rail system, disrupting operations across vast stretches. The United States factories, their output unrelenting, ensured no pause in this advance. Soviet forces, bolstered by U.S. trucks and Lend-Lease aircraft, pressed from the east, their T-34 seconds outnumbering panzers. This pincer movement, a steel vice, trapped Germany's armies, their retreat a chaotic rout. Germany's war machine, once formidable, lay in ruins, its factories silent under Allied bombs. About 1,580 armored fighting vehicles, monthly in 1944, faced about 1,700 from America, a gap unbridgeable by 1945. Hitler's obsession with heavy designs, like the Tiger II, each requiring 300,000 man-hours, crippled output. Shermans, built in 48,000 man-hours, rolled off Detroit lines, their reliability a lethal edge. The number that matters is tanks. 49,234 Shermans buried Germany's 492 Tiger IIs. Allied logistics, fed by U.S. trucks hauling 2.5 tons, kept armies moving, while German units, their fuel tanks dry, resorted to makeshift fuels. The United States' 96,318 aircraft bombed depots and bridges, severing German lifelines. By April, Berlin's outskirts loomed, with Soviet and Allied forces closing in. Many German formations struggled to maintain communications as supplies dwindled. This industrial disparity, mechanical and unyielding, turned Germany's defenses into dust. Allied momentum, now a relentless force, sealed Germany's fate, its steel heart American. Fuel reserves were rapidly exhausted in many sectors. Factories, their power grids failing, built tanks with brittle welds that split under fire. The Luftwaffe, its pilots grounded, watched Allied aircraft dominate. The constraint was production, America's vast capacity versus Germany's ruin. By April 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin, their T-34 seconds grinding through rubble, supported by U.S. built trucks. American factories, their output a distant engine, produced about 1,700 armored fighting vehicles monthly in 1944, each Sherman a workhorse. Germany's defenses, now shattered alloy, could not hold. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318, secured, Allied dominance. This industrial chasm, forged by distant plants, ensured Germany's fronts, once iron, collapsed entirely. On May 7th, Germany surrendered, its war machine broken, its cities ruins under Allied steel. The human toll, though secondary to steel, drove this final act. American workers, their homes safe, toiled with purpose, their rivets binding victory. Allied soldiers, armed with U.S. tanks and trucks, fought with mechanical resolve, their advance a relentless tide. German troops, their morale broken, abandoned posts, their vehicles useless without fuel, The United States factories, their assembly lines a steady pulse, powered this collapse. A B-24 strike on rail yards could disrupt a German division's movement, its bombs a precise scalpel. Berlin's fall, a graveyard for Axis ambition, marked the war's end. The constraint was endurance. Allied forces, backed by America's output, outlasted Germany's faltering machine. As 1945 dawned, victory was certain, its foundation laid in the relentless grind of U.S. industrial might, a legacy of steel and precision. Sherman tanks, 49,234. By war's end, each capable of roughly 100 miles on a tank of fuel, overwhelmed 492 Tiger IIs. The number that matters is tanks. America's output buried Germany's ruins. Thousands of GMC CCKW trucks, hauling 2.5 tons over rough terrain, sustained Allied logistics to the end. Factories in Detroit, their lines unscarred, forged a legacy of steel that reshaped global power. This industrial triumph, mechanical and precise, sealed Germany's defeat, its echo a new world order. Germany's surrender, signed May 7th, marked the end of its industrial ambition. By early 1945, over 90% of Germany's synthetic fuel production was crippled, leaving tanks and planes grounded. Factories in the Ruhr, such as Krupp's Steel Works and Panther plants at MAN and Daimler-Benz, elsewhere in the Reich, stood idle, their output throttled. German commanders admitted defeat, their fuel tanks dry as Allied bombs fell. The constraint was production, America's vast capacity versus Germany's collapse. The United States' 96,318 aircraft bombed relentlessly, severing lifelines. About 1,700 armored fighting vehicles monthly in 1944, each Sherman a workhorse, outpaced Germany's 1,580. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 ensured no respite. This industrial chasm, a cold equation, left Germany's fronts broken, its surrender a formality in Berlin's ruins. The United States emerged as an industrial titan, its wartime output a blueprint for dominance. Factories, their assembly lines a steady pulse, transitioned to peacetime, their methods studied globally. Sherman tanks, 49,234 against 492 Tiger IIs, proved quantity over complexity. Allied logistics, fed by U.S. trucks hauling 2.5 tons, set a standard for future conflicts. The Cold War took shape, its strategies rooted in production's primacy. The number that matters is tanks, 49,234 secured victory's foundation. This legacy, forged in steel, redefined warfare, prioritizing supply over fleeting technological edges. The United States industrial model, a relentless engine, became a global benchmark, its impact enduring beyond 1945. The human cost, though secondary to steel, cemented this shift. American workers, their homes safe, built victory with precision, their rivets a silent force. Allied soldiers, armed with U.S. materiel, stood triumphant in Berlin's rubble. German troops, their morale broken, surrendered en masse, their vehicles useless without fuel. A B-24 strike on rail yards could disrupt entire divisions, its bombs a final scalpel. Fuel reserves ran dry in days. The constraint was endurance. Allied forces, backed by America's output, outlasted Germany's ruin. This industrial legacy, a cold machinery of victory, endures in modern warfare. Its lesson clear. Wars are won by the relentless grind of production, not brilliance alone. In 1945, America's factories stood as titans, their steel legacy reshaping global warfare. The United States produced 96,318 aircraft by 1944, dwarfing Germany's 40,593, a gap that broke Axis skies. Sherman tanks, 49,234 against 492, Tiger IIs, proved production's might. The number that matters is tanks. America's output redefined victory. Detroit's assembly lines, unscarred, became a model for industrial power, their methods shaping post-war economies. This relentless engine, mechanical and precise, forged a new era where logistics reigned supreme, its echo enduring in military doctrine. The Cold War crystallized this lesson, with production as warfare's backbone. Soviet planners, studying Germany's defeat, prioritized output, their factories mirroring America's scale. German engineers, their designs once revered, admitted production's primacy over complexity. The constraint was scale. America's capacity outlasted all. Allied logistics, fed by thousands of GMC CCKW trucks hauling 2.5 tons, set a standard. Over 90% of Germany's synthetic fuel production lay crippled by 1945, a testament to industrial targeting. This strategic shift, a cold calculus, embedded production in global arsenals, from NATO to Warsaw Pact. Fuel reserves shaped strategy for decades. The United States industrial model, a relentless pulse, influenced Reconstruction, its factories powering Europe's recovery. The number that matters is aircraft. 96,318 set a benchmark. This legacy, forged in steel, endures. Modern warfare hinges on supply chains, a truth born in 1945's rubble, where America's output proved wars are won by endurance, not brilliance alone.